The first thing I noticed when I began my night shifts at St. Augustine's Hospital was the overwhelming silence. Hospitals are supposed to be bustling with activity, even at night. But here, the silence was almost palpable, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was just nerves, that I'd get used to it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every night, I walked through the dimly lit corridors, my footsteps echoing off the cold, sterile walls. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced just out of the corner of my eye. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my duties, but the oppressive atmosphere seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The patients, too, seemed unnaturally quiet. They lay in their beds, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling or the walls, rarely blinking. When I checked on them, they would look at me with hollow, vacant eyes, as if they were seeing something I couldn't. Their silence was unnerving, and I often found myself hurrying through my rounds, eager to get back to the relative safety of the nurse's station. One night, as I made my way through the oncology ward, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was frigid, far colder than it should have been. I pulled my sweater tighter around me and continued my rounds. As I passed room 213, I heard a faint whispering. It was so soft that I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. But the closer I got to the room, the louder it became. It wasn't words, just a low, continuous murmur that sent shivers down my spine. I pushed open the door, and the whispering stopped. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. I glanced around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickly closed the door and moved on, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. As the weeks went by, the strange occurrences became more frequent. I would see figures out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. The whispering became a constant background noise, growing louder and more insistent as the night wore on. I began to dread going to work, but I needed the job, and I convinced myself that it was all in my head. One particularly quiet night, I was assigned to the old wing of the hospital, a section that had been closed off for years. It was used for storage now, filled with old medical equipment and dusty furniture. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I had a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed it aside and went about my duties. As I was inventorying some old medical supplies, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath came out in white puffs, and I rubbed my arms, trying to warm myself. That's when I saw her. Standing at the end of the corridor was a nurse, her uniform pristine and her cap perched perfectly on her head. But there was something off about her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were hollow, empty voids. I blinked, and she was gone. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over an old wheelchair. I hurried back to the nurse's station, my mind racing. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I couldn't handle the job. But the encounters continued. The ghostly nurse appeared more frequently, always just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes she was alone. Other times she was accompanied by shadowy figures, their faces obscured by darkness. They never spoke, never approached me, but their presence was overwhelming. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I started to avoid the old wing altogether, but the hauntings followed me. I would find items moved, equipment malfunctioning without explanation, and the whispering grew louder and more urgent. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, my sanity slowly unraveling. One night, as I was preparing to leave, I found a note slipped under my locker door. It was written in a shaky hand, the words barely legible. "They're watching. They want you. Leave while you can." My blood ran cold, and I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I handed in my resignation the next day. As I left the hospital for the last time, I felt their eyes on me, a silent promise that they would never let me go. The memories of St. Augustine's haunt me still, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into their grasp.